Hi everyone, this is Elisa. We are on the panel session here, but we are still waiting like 2 minutes for all of you to join. So whoever is there, maybe you want to say hi in the chat, where you're from. And yeah, let's see how many we get here. Maybe no one joined yet. Oh. Hi Thomas, hi Jared. Jana's there. All coming in. People from Dublin, Paris, Portugal. I'm also in Portugal. All Europe today. I don't know, Julian, are you in Germany or in Finland today?
I'm in Berlin, yeah.
In Berlin, okay. And Patrick from London.
London. Am I still in Europe?
Do we have someone? Oh, we have someone from Harlem, I just saw. And from Dubai, so it gets very international.
New Zealand.
So many people. Great to have you all here. Okay. Guess we should start. So welcome to the session, Nailing Your First 100 Days as a Startup CFO. We're going to have a little panel discussion, so there are not very like slides that we prepared. You have a Q&A tab. Just put your questions there. We try to incorporate them or just see what is left at the end. I'm Elisa. I'm head of controlling at the new company. We are making very delicious chocolate that is healthy for you and is good for the environment. Before that, I was 5 years at Spreadshirt in the FP&A sector, and in between at Yazio, which is an app, as a head of finance. So my main past has been around controlling, but also in startup environments. And now I'm going to hand over to Patrick, who will also introduce himself.
Hello, very nice to meet you, everyone. So Patrick, if I take the past 10 years, I've gone through three startups. Basically, one as CFO. The first one was B2B data storage startup. It was so small that I had a CFO job, title, but I didn't do a CFO job there. So we'll come back to that later. Then I joined a marketplace in the car sharing industry called Drivey. It was based in France. We expanded it to 6 countries and then sold it to some of the American friends of GetAround, and then did some transition and then joined recently. So a year ago now, in November, I joined Fnatic, which is an esport brand. So we are basically the longest standing and most successful esport team in history. And so we have the teams and we make business by getting some media rights, some sponsorship, and selling some both physical and digital products.
Welcome on board.
Thank you.
All right. And where are you from, Patrick? Remember when we first talked, I could hardly tell you this beautiful mix of French and British accent.
Yeah, half French, half British. And I have to say, I got a bit of my wife's Yorkshire accent that came into there.
Yeah. All right. Well, as you can see from my name, probably I'm German, 100%. Julian Lange is my name. I am currently CFO of Ivan. It's a software company. Very complicated what we do, but database as a service may be the one sentence answer to this. Before that, I had quite an eventful career. So usually you will hear, usually I attract a bit kind of interesting times wherever I go. So at Ivan, maybe I'm too new still, but it's happened everywhere before. So I started my career at General Electric. It's a big American conglomerate, and I was there for 10 years. I started as a trainee, and then at the end, after 10 years when I left, I was a segment CFO there. And in the meantime, I saw the financial crisis when I was in headquarters, and then I joined a nice, stable, boring business in the nuclear industry, energy, and then Fukushima happened, and that whole business completely got turned upside down. And then after 10 years, I switched. I became the CFO of Marley Spoon. It's a direct-to-consumer food business. Basically joined pre-revenue and with 50 people on the company. And then I stayed 6 years. The company last year made $300 million in sales, 1,500 people across 3 continents. So needless to say, that was interesting. And And it developed nicely, but there were also some trying times. For example, when Blue Apron, the earliest meal kit company out there, completely failed after the IPO. This really made it tough also for us. So very eventful 16 years before I joined Ivan earlier this year.
What a journey. So what's the crisis you imagine to happen next for Ivan?
I'm okay for 5-6 years without money, just growth like this, and everything working fine would be nice for a change. So
okay, fingers crossed. So let's dive in. Can you share some 100 days experience when you started as a new CFO? How was that?
Well, our first rebound was Julian just said, it's eventful, so never as per the plan. So basically, it's whenever there's the 3 times I've joined as CFO the first 100 days, it's I always had a plan and it never went according to plan. I think the most example is when I joined Drivey, actually, it was my plan was come in, structure the company. There was no finance team, just for Series A. And I was really guaranteed by the CEO during the interview process that I could do that because I would have time, because there was no funding plan, there was no M&A plan, there was nothing planned. And then fast forward 5 months, and we had raised money and we had acquired 3 companies. So what's for sure is I didn't do anything that I had planned, but it didn't matter that much. But this is what you can expect when you join a startup, I think, is the constant change of what's happening. And that was the same as Fanatic. It was I did a 100 days plan actually during the interview process, and it was all about I want to learn about a company. I want to play the VC, challenge your numbers, because we're going to go into funding. So I think having that exterior view before I know too much of the company was important. Then start raising some money, build the process, and finally get the team and the structure aligned. And you join, and you're okay, now we need to raise money. So you don't know anything, but go and raise. And this is what we did, basically. And the first 4 months was heads on, nothing to learn about. It was I had to sell something that I didn't really yet know, but luckily it worked.
Yeah. In my 2 at Marley Spoon and also at Ivan, it was always kind of lucky coincidence that I joined when basically there was a round going on that in Ivan's case, I helped get over the finish line, but it was basically already done. So I can imagine with you, right, if there's a race going on, then that can take over everything. So maybe I had a bit more time in both cases to focus more on kind of typical 100-day stuff. Though to be brutally honest, at Marley Spoon, I didn't really know. I came from this corporate background, and so I didn't have that much of an experience kind of coming into what does it mean to then go into a startup, right? And to give you some examples, for example, the things that you do even as a CFO of a segment in a big company like GE, you never get exposed to fundraising. You never talk to banks, actually, which is probably the best part of being in a big corporate, because the worst part of being a startup CFO. The systems are somehow there, they work. You don't usually need to get involved in that. There's specialists for this, there's specialists for tax, so those were all topics that I really had very little exposure to. So I kind of came in eyes wide open thinking, okay, let me see what that all is like. Which also meant I didn't hire that many people first. So at Marley Spoon, I really came in, I was finance person number 1. I immediately hired 1 analyst and 1 working student, but that was kind of it, because I also wanted to do a lot of the things myself and even honestly learn some of it that I had no prior exposure to. I had maybe seen what it looks like at a big company, but not how do you get there. At Ivan, I think it was, again, we raised money right away, so that was a priority, of course. There was also a bit more of a team and structure in place. So we were 7 people at the start. There was already an ERP, so some of those things I didn't have to do from scratch like I did at Marley Spoon, and that were focused there. So next to helping on the round, I think it was a bit more kind of typical first 100-day topics. So we did In my second month, we had a board meeting where we presented the budget. So our fiscal years, I started in January. We had the board meeting in February. Then 1st of April is the start of our fiscal year. So it was obvious we would talk about a budget. Company had never done a budget. So now that took a lot of time in the first month or 6 weeks. So those are maybe more typical things that I did at Ivan now. We can go into more detail here.
Yeah, I think it is, well, as we say, it also depends on the stage of the company when you join, because the first one I said, I was CFO of a company that didn't need a CFO. The reason why I was hired is actually they wanted me to do some sales and sell a product to CFOs. I have to say I probably didn't do that great of a job, because at the end we had to close the company and we didn't get to the sales level. What it brought to me was really about, actually, it's quite rare when you're a CFO, you join usually at a later stage into a company. And that made me discover what the company is before the CFO time, actually, which I think very useful on this one. And then I joined the next one after Series A and the next one just before Series B. And I think like things are different and things are changing, as I was saying before, but with still some consistency in, like, there's three things for me that are often like are always requested, which the first one is, yes, in startup, a CFO is here to raise money and probably will spend half of his time raising money. But it's not just about that. It's like they're also here to bring structure. Sometimes the first person that will actually bring structure into the company, because CEOs can't be that structured. I've met once in my life that was even more structured than me, which was a bit strange. But apart from that, it's like they're more creative, they're more visionary than structured. But they want structure, but they don't want structure too fast, because it's really an overkill, especially when we've been trained in large firms, you, Julian, in your previous life, and, Ernst & Young for me. And it's kind of like, if you try to bring things too fast, it breaks the pace of the company, and it can break your relationship with the CEO, because he wants to keep some agility. Whatever the stage of the company, he thinks the company is still agile before you join. Sometimes tricky to define what is agility, which is just doing too many things and going into too many directions, but they want to bring the structure, but not too fast. Like examples like, purchase order is something that is like crazy in small companies. Like I'm going to need approval to like sign something. But then you get a point where basically it's just like, if you don't bring that structure at the right time, it's just, it's like, it's going to fail, it's going to work. You're going to be able to do your job. We're not going to monitor the company the right way. So raise money, bring structure. And also the last one is like, understand the risk of the business. It doesn't mean you need to solve that. It means you need to come, list them, and make sure that you have a plan around each of them, which is reasonable. When I joined Drivey at the time, we were operating completely illegally because we needed a banking license that we never asked for. So like, you can either react as like, you stop the entire company until that happens, or we try to build something with all the other leaders in the company, which is, okay, what would really happen if they turned up tomorrow and asked us to change it? Would they close down the company tomorrow? Therefore, we have to do it. We have no choice. And the reality, we contacted most marketplaces in Paris that had the same issue. And like, did it happen to you? Did they come? And they all said they came, and it took they gave 9 months to be compliant. And then we built something internally with the team, which they said, well, we just were about to choose Stripe at that point. And the tech team saying, if we put Stripe in place, then we only need 3 months to make it happen if it comes. And you know what? We never did it for another 4 years. And the day we did it was not because the ACPR, which is the French FCA regulator, came, is because it was a business need that happened. But it was not a stress anymore. As soon as we all knew we have a plan if it was to happen. And it's really about this risk assessment around the business.
Yeah, that's I remember that from working at a giant US corporation that are very prone to getting sued of everything, right? We always said at GE, don't do the legal test, do the newspaper test. If someone wrote about this in the newspaper, would you like to read that or not? Yeah. And I think that level of the newspaper test is probably very different in the startup. If you read, they didn't have the full certificate to operate like what they were doing, you would say, okay, that sometimes happens. So I think your standard is quite different in bringing structure and assessing these risks. And sometimes I remember in Marley Spoon, for sure, there were things that I said, you mentioned purchase orders, which is even way later, but things around the structure and how we did things. Where I said, I know we need to get there, but it's fine even next year or 1.5 years. It's it will be too much right now. So for sure, and I think also this point about understanding your risk, I think it also helps you kind of really focus more on what's really important to the business. So race is always one, but I have another interesting example from Marley Spoon where we were doing a huge product pivot, like basically 2 months, 3 months into my job there. Yeah, so we had an idea about how this was going to work. So we actually wanted to more get people who go to a restaurant use meal kits versus kind of families that already cook. Yeah, I remember my marketing onboarding had like a picture of a family with a red cross through it. Yeah. So we're not catering to families. And then 3 months later, we were like the family meal kits. Yeah. So it was a pretty massive pivot, how we positioned the product, the recipes changed, all of this. And that was super important to work on those numbers with the business and understand cohorts, what's the payback, what's the acquisition cost, really understand these unit economics, how much do I pay for a customer, how long do they stay, and how do this compare? Yeah, so we tried both. We tried we tried both ways. We looked over a few months at different sets of data and then said, okay, this is clearly better. And it was important to be there for that, yeah, just like it is for a race, because that really made the company then at the end. And then I cannot be sitting there and saying, let's work on a bit on structure and implement this and that, So you have to have a thick skin in terms of not having everything that you want to have from day one. And then at Ivan, I think, again, a bit more advanced in terms of the company now. It's already 5-6 years old, already significant employee and revenue base. But we were just, as I joined earlier this year, we were just crossing this 100 people mark. Yeah, and I've seen that at Marley Spoon also, that tends to be when a lot of these like people and cultural topics bubble up, like the communication could be better. How are things decided? I don't know what's going on anymore. You get this kind of, we had in February an employee survey, and these kind of things came up. So actually, I would say in the first 2 months, I spent a good amount of time on people and culture processes. Like, we refreshed our values, and I've spent a bit of time on this. We implemented like 360 feedback. We implemented some things around it, how we interview and hire. So really not necessarily core finance, right? But we still don't have a VP people. She's about to start actually, but this was clearly something I've seen in my past, and I knew that when the company was starting to spread out over multiple locations and time zones, that if we don't do this now, then, and I had some experience from Marley Spoon, kind of how do you scale beyond this 100 and across multiple time zones and so on. So then I think that was important. Yeah, I mean, another example maybe we started having not just one kind of commercial team that does it all, but really like specialized sub-functions. So for example, something like customer success, which is not actually acquiring new customers, but working on existing customers. And so we had to rewrite. One of the things that I spent a lot of time on was rewriting the bonus or commissions rules, because before, it was, they were doing everything, and now you have these specialized roles, and then of course they need different incentives. Yeah, so this was quite an exercise. So just as maybe a couple of examples of, don't be stuck in your kind of, I need to build structure and do my finance CFO job, because in both of my jobs, it was that you actually got dragged into something else that was maybe much more important at the time. Yeah, and I think, Patrick, you also have some of these examples, but at Marley Spoon, after 1 year, I did head of operations for 1 year, right? Because it was just then we were growing after the pivot, and then it was really hard to scale. Yeah, we found, okay, it's easy to build, to maybe send 500 boxes a week, but then once you go into thousands, you need different processes. Yeah, so I did that for a year and then gave it up to some real specialists. And then later, even I helped lead the European segment. Now at the end of my time at Marley, and it's just maybe examples of. I see this CFO role much wider than I just do my stuff, and if I do my things and it's fine. No, I think you're at a unique position to understand the business, and you can help in a lot of different ways. And that's what happened to me over and over, not just in the first 100 days.
Now, I've seen that pattern as well, and accelerating, and now being dragged maybe out of finance within the first 100 days, which I find a little bit crazy sometimes. Because so at Drivey, it was a bit different because I had to be in finance, we had to raise, we had to do these M&As. There's really activities relating to what we were doing. But it was more after a few years where basically, a bit like you, we did a pivot into. It was a purely C2C marketplace, so people sharing their own car with other individuals. And we wanted to scale quicker, and scaling quicker was basically going into the B2B for the supply side, having people putting hundreds of cars on the platform at once rather than one car thing. And at that point, it's like I actually left the role of CFO and we hired a new one because I was maybe the only one, due to my previous experience, that had B2B experience into that company. And then you kind of like, yeah, it's like you're dragged into something that you maybe didn't plan at that point. And I loved it. It was like 2 years of building another like business unit with all that it requires. But I have to say now, joining Fnatic, there was actually something about like, I want to go back to finance and I want maybe to stay a bit more in finance. And now the subjects are a bit the one you mentioned, which are a bit blurred around, is really the question about the CFO, COO type role, where structure, processes, OKRs, RACI, so all these frameworks that basically try to organize the internal side of the company. It's like, it's often basically when you come from a company that was slightly bigger than the stage of your current company, you've seen things working, and you want to make sure that the company doesn't make the same mistakes that you did the time before when you didn't know about it. And you just kind of like, okay, I've seen how OKRs can work, but it works in that way. So let's try to build it that way and not do the same mistakes again. And so I've had more kind of like, at the moment, it's more questions like we don't have a COO, and I'm taking some of that function. But we had an exec workshop maybe 2 weeks ago now. And one of the questions was, what's your aspiration in 12 months? And probably 5 years ago, I would have said, well, I'm very happy to be the CEO or CFO of the company, which I did at Drivey, where this time I want to stay the CFO of the company and not maybe be dragged into all of other things, because I think like people underestimate the value of the CFO role and what it can bring beyond just raising, as I said before. And so that's, but we all face like the willingness to do other things and the pressure from the business to, okay, can you help here? And this is the exciting part of the CFO as well.
Very great. I guess there's like the Q&A is exploding because everyone wants to know, how do you prioritize? Let's put Michael's question on the stage. How do you decide like what's the first 3 things, or what has been the most important thing you had to do? I guess it's like raising money, but also depends on what you get when you come there, right?
Yeah, it's very much about, you can't know the day before you join what really are the 3 priorities of the business. And it's really maybe an arbitration of like, you think you know after a month, and then you don't actually. And even in COVID, it's even worse because you don't like, there's less part of being that in the culture and in the thing. So you just get the information that's pushed to you, and you make some assumptions based on that where you haven't seen yet things working. So I think, well, there's always where do you start from? One is the basics of the finance needs to be under control. To me, it's like there's no like balance sheet recs. They need to be there. They need to be known. They need to be under control. If you don't have the basic foundations, like you need to build them before you can expand. Otherwise, it breaks along the way. And anything else, you're driven by any business priority that will be thrown at you, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess we had the wrong question, but yeah.
We can probably, I mean, we have a couple more sections coming up in terms of, building the finance team. I think there was a question also from someone, how do you build relationships with, the rest of the execs or the board and investors? So I think those couple, I mean, Patrick, when we talked about, I think those are clear priorities that you always have to have. And then I think maybe, there are some things around, I think, the metrics or the processes you're trying to put in. So I think we'll cover a lot of this maybe in the rest of our talk. But maybe the first section, kind of the takeaway was next to these kind of the standard items, there will be at least one. It could be a race, so it's probably a race and an operational thing that you will get dragged into, something the company needs. And then I think you need to do more than just kind of team and building relationships and processes. Yeah, that's kind of, I think, the key message here.
Yeah, I hope that answers Michael's question. I also have the feeling that you get the input when you come there, and then it just naturally flows and you know what to do next. Okay, so let's talk about the hot topic, your finance department. What do you do first when you think about structuring the finance departments? What have you done in your past experience? Maybe let's start with accounting. How was accounting when you came to like Marley Spoon, for example, Julian?
Yeah, and I think Michael also asked about biggest mistakes there. So I think in the team structuring, we'll get into some of those mistakes with Patrick and I for sure. But yeah, accounting, I think interesting. Maybe not. I think that worked pretty well at Marley Spoon. So I think very typical in the beginning, all outsourced, and then it kind of over the years gradually was more and more insourced. We kind of approached it in a way, wherever we got big in a certain country, you'll see it from the monthly bill, right? Your accountants at some point, they'll send you 5-6K, and then you're like, maybe I can just hire someone who does this. And of course, you will see with the more countries you do, the more complex, and then you're waiting for 6 different external providers, and one of them will always be late, or the main person, the usual person is on vacation or sick, and then the whole process stalls always for one of them. So that's usually when you try to, we had huge problems finding a good external provider in the US. So we tried 2, and then that was kind of the first one we insourced. And anyway, US started to get big. So I think those 2 factors kind of aligned. And then maybe at Ivan, we're now even insourcing a bit earlier because it's a software business. So much more activity runs through your headquarter, the parent entity. So it's easier to also kind of, most of the action is there, all the revenue, for example. So here, I think that the path is always like you start external, you insource at some point, and then maybe those couple of factors in terms of complexity and how much it costs you are kind of the ways to decide when to bring it in-house.
Yeah, for us, for the in-house was really driven by how long does it take to do the process, and when we rely on external accountants, given the budget that we have. And at the beginning, I've done companies where no one cared about the accounting. Let's be clear about it. It's like all they care about is a few, like the investors, even the leaders internally were driven by OKRs on sales metrics, OKRs on conversion metrics for marketplace, all this kind of thing. But the reality of like, how does that translate into accounting? No one ever asked for it. We sent it to the board because we had a requirement to send it to the board because we had a shareholder agreement. Like, did they read it? Probably not. So whether you send it on the 25th, it's like, if no one cares, it doesn't matter. And then when you grow, some new concept come into play, and they want to understand a bit more the company, and you have some bigger investors that come in, and bigger investors are much more data driven, sometimes because they have much more analysts to look at your data, so you need to feed that. But also, so then if you can't have your numbers ready and really understand them by the time you need to send them, that becomes much more of an issue. And that's where we started in sourcing at a point where it's like you need to anticipate when that shift from the people who receive it and use it will change. And because that insourcing takes time. And you really have to, it's like, for us, it probably took, it takes a year before I think about it. I choose the software, I find a provider, I make it happen, I import my data, which can take forever, all these kind of things. So like, really try to think, when is my closing timeline going to block me from the requirements of the people who receive it? I think was the way we took it.
Okay, so what's your next like midterm structure, or what did you tackle next when you thought about your team? What was the most important position to fill?
I think the team we discussed with Julian during the pre-call is like, it really depends who's in place when you join. And so Drivey joined, no one in finance, everything outsourced. It's like, and everything wrong, and it doesn't matter, as I just said. Fast forward to Fanatic, very different, because I joined. There is a head of finance that is here that is quite strong, very strong. That had been able to build that budget that Julian mentioned before. So I'm more in a position of how do I fit into the place there, and I really wanted to rely on him. So the question whether the team comes before a structure or structure comes before the team, for me was I still didn't completely know him. So I come into the business and I think, okay, I know that I want finance, tax, and P&A. Okay, so do I put everything into him? Is my vision everything into him, or is my vision spread across 3 leaders? And I think after 6 weeks, I knew that it was going to be him. And we would organize ourselves in a mode that I'm CFO was only actually for finance, only 1 direct report. And we already have a head of people reporting to the CEO. We already have a head of legal reporting into the CEO. So it's kind of like it's a little bit like what we call Mexican army of like, I only have 1 direct report in that part, but it makes sense because of the people that I had here into the company.
Yeah, I think it's a good point about, I mean, coming into Ivan, I also did a lot with the kind of team structure and my direct reports. And I think you need to do that early to kind of set it up right. And, if you take 6 months to do it or a year to do it, sometimes, the things cannot be fixed anymore or it's too late. So just to give you an example, so I had 3 direct reports when I came in to Ivan. Now I have 6. Out of the 3, 1 left. 2 I actually promoted from within the team that weren't direct reports, that are now direct reports, and then 2 are hired. Yeah, so this is now from 6, really 2 were there, 2 were promoted, 2 got in. So I think that's not all based on similar things that Patrick said. It's kind of, you look at the people, you see them operate, you have a vision in mind, but I also try to balance that a little bit with, no, it doesn't have to be there in 3 months, but no, I for sure have some of my 6 direct reports that I don't know if they can take the next step in a year and a half or 2 years, but let's try and see how it goes, right? So then maybe it's not the final structure I have yet, but I think you do a lot early and then you maybe mold it a bit to the people you have. Of course, easier and a better story to tell when you have these people that grow with the organization, but it's not always possible. Yeah, so we'll see in a year from now. Will probably not be the exact same 6, or it will be more or 1 less, or we'll see. But I think getting it kind of 80-90% there pretty quickly, I think is important.
Okay, so both of you have mostly like FP&A, accounting, tax that report to you, right?
Yeah, also legal in my case, and even sales operations, which is like a sales support team now at Ivan. But I think that's more, Patrick, you know this too. I think if there's no other logical owner in the org, then a lot of times it goes to finance, and it's back to what you said, right? So we are can we provide the structure at least into the topic, right? So we don't need to be a functional expert, but if there's some people who are, and you can help them kind of, with that at least for a time. Yeah. So something like sales ops, I'll probably not own for very long. We're looking for a chief revenue officer at Ivan right now, and that's probably the more logical manager long term. But I'll do it in the meantime, and I think I can help the person for now. So.
Yeah, the way we've named it is like, I have someone in my team that is head of special projects, which we don't know exactly what her role is, but every time there is a special project that comes here. And I'm actually at the moment managing the growth of Japan. Don't ask me why, I'm still not sure why. But it's like, as I said, there is no clear owner until there is one, and I'm pushing to have one. This is when things will change.
Okay, good. And like the teams you came into the teams, both of you, I guess, started during COVID. How did that work out? How did you manage to build the team? What did you do to get to know them, interact with them, connect with them?
So to work, with the team it's like, for me, as I said, I came and there was a very strong head of finance. So Michael was there, and it was important to me to make everyone clear that he still leads the finance team. And for example, team building stuff, that should be on him. He should be the one giving the dynamic. I will be here, I will be present, because I want to show the importance of the finance team. But this is his role to make that happen. And I was more like working on making sure the finance team was really considered as part of the team of the entire company. And how do we get to all work together? But again, because there had been a 5-year plan built just before I joined, these interactions had really already, the connections were there. So it was nurturing these connections in terms of like really the finance team onboarding and my role into that.
And I took a pretty active approach, as you can imagine. So if you'd kind of change your entire list of direct reports, and it's kind of really a new team we put together at Ivan there with those with those 6 people. I think you do a lot. You try really to do offsites where the team gets to know each other. We also, next to that, just with the kind of finance leads, we also grew the team now. So I said we started with 7 and now we're 25 people, right, in all these various sub-functions. So one of the things that I knew I had to do was really, I meet with every single person, of course, usually during the interview process, but then at least, right in the first few days, get to know them a little bit, make sure they feel welcome and know what the role is and how they fit in, because the structure is ever changing. We do like values exercises, so they kind of introduce them a bit more formally to the team with some of these kind of, typical questionnaires you can play with. And there's some good ones that I think really break the ice nicely and introduce them as a person to the team. And then we also did these kind of learning sessions on let's call it concepts that I like and that I would like people to sort of follow, at least not to the T, but one of my favorites, for example, Radical Candor. If you haven't read that book, I highly recommend it. It talks about how to be open and direct with each other in the spirit of making things better. Atomic Habits, another great one. Deep work nowadays with all this distraction and home office and all this. So there's a few things that books or concepts that we did as learning sessions together, and it was usually just kind of me trying to show it to them and say, what do you think? And then there was a good kind of lively discussion kind of for the second half of the hour we covered it. And I think that's important to kind of have this, get to know each other on one hand, but also like maybe put down some ground rules without, writing them down. Here's the 10 rules, but really just to kind of, okay, that's probably how we should work together. Yeah.
The positive side of this get to know what people are doing during COVID was actually when I joined in November, just the start of a new lockdown in the UK, and people they were stuck with me for an hour in a call, whatever they were doing. So they had to kind of prepare what they were like to really explain what they were doing. There was no that question of sometimes when you join where you spend 5 minutes at the coffee machine, someone tells you what they're doing and they feel that now they should know. So going into that detail, so I will keep that in the future was like, even if we're back in the office, it's like force really these kind of like in-depth understanding of what people are doing by getting the time in face-to-face or camera-to-camera, one-on-one, to really understand each part of the business. That one other thing. And because of that, I didn't feel the pain of not being in the office, probably for the first, there was a raise as well, but for the first 4 or 5 months. And this is when the raise was done. We were there to kind of like, I needed to know more, I needed to interact, I need to understand how the company works better, that I felt the pain of being at home, basically.
Okay. And if we're talking about relationships and team building, there's also the other side, outside of the company, which is the investors. And there's also some Q&A I've seen in the right side. So let's talk a little bit. How did you, when you start, have you met them before in your interview, and how did you start connecting with them?
It was interesting. So I actually only met one person from Ivan in person here in Berlin, and the other interviews were all remote, virtual. But I have to say, I did spend a lot of time in Helsinki also. So probably 8 months now, for 40% or something. So I did go there regularly once a month for probably always a couple of weeks or so, to really, because both the entire management team was there and then also in the beginning, all of my team. So now it's starting to spread out a bit, but so I think it was really important. And Helsinki also for some reason wasn't maybe as locked down as other places in Europe. So it was a bit easier to do things in person there. But I think it was really, really important. Not just kind of for this usual, run into each other at the water cooler, have a beer or a coffee together with someone, to build the personal relationship. But no, I just mentioned radical candor. So I'm a big believer in this kind of, say something when you see something. And it's much easier if you had a bit of a personal interaction, or you do it face to face the first time, especially, right? So there were for sure things that the CEO and I said to each other to say, hey, do you know you're doing this, or is this how we always do it, or can we arrange that a bit different? And also with people from the team. So I think that, of course, it really helped to have the first time these conversations in person. But I think, Patrick, you proved me wrong on this one. You did everything remote, and it still worked. So
yeah. Didn't meet anyone during the interview process, didn't meet anyone into the company, didn't meet anything. And I have to say, I was like, it's funny because when I went into the interview process at the beginning, I said to the recruiter, I want an HQ in London, because I had lived 2 years in London with HQ in Paris, and I felt disconnected from HQ. And I said, with COVID now, I really want to get back to that connection. And then I joined Fanatic day one. I have a one-on-one with the CEO. Oh, he's based in Ibiza. He's not based in London. So it's kind of like, and I was like, how's that going to work out? And the reason why we got to know each other really quickly well is because we had to work on a project together. I think if it had just been the day-to-day of things, it would have been more tricky. But because we were all aligned, all the leaders, all the execs on raising that money, working on a project makes you, like, we really created a bond and a relation, which is critical to the relation between the CFO, CEO. Is always something very special. I live the other side. When I left the CFO role at Drivey, and the new CFO came in, I lost a bit of connection with the CEO that he recreated with the new CFO. There's something there that is special. If we talk about investors specifically, like, I met all the investors during the process via Zoom for the board, all the board. And there are a lot of them, believe me. I think one of them said we were 14 of us at the last board, which is far too much. I met all of them because also there was a CFO and didn't work out. So they wanted to know me to make sure that there's not a second time that it doesn't work out and understand this. What I really like, where you struggle and where I struggled was you get to know them and you want to understand from them what is the most urgent thing that the company, from their point of view, needs to change. When you get that, you start getting into discussion. As Julian told me during the process, we agree, it's like they don't care about the technical finance in reality. They care about the strategy. You can very quickly be dragged onto side discussions about strategy with investors that basically will create a relationship that is not the right one, because all these strategy discussions need to involve the CEO. He's the one that should embody the strategy for the company. So it's sometimes tricky to make sure that basically you get the information that you need, but you don't get dragged too much into things that you shouldn't be the one leading with them.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I wouldn't sweat it too much. Usually, the kind of these board members, investors, they kind of reach out to you. I wouldn't try to overly force that. A lot of them, as you said, they're not really interested in your day-to-day. But that's still not to say that some regular meetings, probably less so. But I think what's really important to keep in mind for you, maybe then in the board meetings, which you probably normally participate in, but there needs to be certain things in the first or second board meeting that you already contribute. Like I mentioned this example of, we did the budget, right? And people kind of liked how it came together, how it was presented, and you get a few things in the win column is kind of my point, right? So I think they don't care that much, but they would of course like to see and get this level of comfort, because maybe before it didn't work out, or they know how it can go wrong from other ventures if the CFO is not there or not good. And so it can be things, core finance topics like budgeting, where you can make a good impression like your first time around, or recently we had a more complicated one in the second board meeting around relaunching our options program, which I have a bit of prior experience. So then I got dragged pretty deep into this, and we had a long discussion with the board around the rules and what we should not do. And I think that's how they get comfortable with you, that you show the depth and you show progress on important things like that. And that's much more important than maybe, meeting them every week, every other week, or having some kind of rigor around it. Yeah.
Very good. So I guess for the investors, I have not seen any more questions. Let's get into our last topic, which is the metrics and the processes. We already covered a little bit, but I have seen also questions that about like data teams. Where is the data team? How do you interact with the data team? Which is also a little bit about metrics. How do you decide, or what was the most important decision to get your company more data driven? What did you do? How did that work?
So the data team has never sat with me, actually. It's either been within a growth team or within the tech team for data in tech companies. And I think it didn't matter that much, but I think the most important thing is to get from every leader in the business, what are the 2-3 KPIs that you care about and you should care about, and don't give me a list of 20. Because if everyone gives me a list of 20, we're not all going into the same direction. There's too many numbers to follow. I'd get around. I think we managed to nail it down. It took years, but we nailed it down to maybe the success of the company relying on one key metric that was on every screen in every office, which was the number of cars equipped with a telematic device that people can install, can unlock with a smartphone. Because if this was growing, everything else was going into the right direction. So every time I joined a company, there was a list of millions of KPIs. So get them to each of them. You got 2. Choose 2. People have to choose what is important for their area of the business. And then as a group later, refine it to ideally get to 1. And I think this is one of the key things that I was pushing there when I was joining.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's this classic, we talked about it a bit leading up to this, Patrick, about, is it more revenue? Is it more profitability? And I think we had an interesting discussion at saying, so of course it's always growth in a startup scale up, but eventually they'll come around the corner, your investors or someone, and say, but now how about profitability, right? And I think, so for example, and usually you cannot put over the switch and now let's be profitable, right? I give you an example from Marley Spoon. I mentioned I had one analyst and then a working student at the start, and one of the first things the working student did was build like a food cost template or recipe calculator for our culinary team, yeah, because at the time it saved, I don't know, right, $500 or something, as the volume was so low. But having the rigor and introducing this early into the process, fast forward throughout the history, we usually had higher margins in Marley Spoon than, for example, HelloFresh had, which was 10 times the size. So because we introduced this, the rigor into the process early, and you cannot just say, okay, now we want to do profitability, so now let's all, run around like with our heads cut off and start doing things. But you need to, there is of course the focus, which is probably growth, but you need to make sure this other thing moves along nicely as you grow, right? Because you cannot start it too late.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and the focus can change 3 times in 3 years. From unicorn is best to cockroach is best. Survive anything you can to back to unicorn. It's just like that's what we do.
And in terms of
initial processes, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Initial processes. I think the thing I always do when I join a startup is actually ask for all the due deal reports from every investor that has been done in the past, because they give me a lot of the risk, they give me a lot of the issues of problems into the company, and that gives me the history of these risks. Because if you've done 3 fundraising before, you kind of see how things have evolved and how the team has dealt with it. So that I always start from this, and then I list someone asked, what is the basic thing of finance? And for me, it's like having all these balance sheet recs done, understood. Everyone needs to know. It's like there is a need to have in a document every number that can be explained. If it can't, we're not under control. We don't know what we have in our accounts. We're not under control. And until it's done, we don't do anything else. You're not promoted to another role. It's like this has to happen.
Yeah, very, very much aligned there. I mean, my team actually at Ivan, they asked me after the first couple of balance sheet reviews, like, are they all going to be this long and detailed? And why do you care about this? But I think the first few you do very detailed, and you'll see it'll go much faster. The other one maybe to leave you guys with is, so balance sheet reviews or recs, very much a fan. The other one is really I call follow the cash. Yeah, so you would be surprised how much stuff you find. like cash coming in, through your payment service providers or whatever, overdue AR. So you follow all the different ways that cash comes in, and you'll usually find something that's not working in that process. And also how cash leaves, right? We redid some of the approval things and now implemented some things around the system there. Look at your payment terms. There's usually some quick wins. So really think about how does cash come in, how does it leave, what can I optimize there most likely, and then also how can I build controls into this whole process, because that's going to be the stuff that really bites you at some point, so that you cannot do early enough. Yeah.
Okay, I'm afraid we're at the end of our session. I guess we could have talked like for hours on that topics. There is a lounge here, a networking table where we can meet and go over some leftover questions if you want to. Thank you, Patrick and Julian, for that insightful talk. And yeah, for the rest of you, have fun at the summit and talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.